Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast. Building tomorrow's best leaders, today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul. I see you. All right, Trevor. Finish. Josh. Coach Carl. Let's go.
Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Curl here, and welcome to episode 420 of the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Today, it's my pleasure to share an interview with William Attaway, who's a leadership coach and author of Catalytic Leadership, the 12 keys to becoming an intentional leader who makes a difference. Many leaders feel over their head in their roles and within the organization. And many leaders don't get the roadmap that they actually need to help them grow as a leader. Many leaders have asked themselves, how do I minimize the risks of falling in the trenches or dropping in the trenches or avoiding the ditches that many leaders face, that many leaders have fallen into? In his book, William shares 12 key principles that can help leaders grow and add value to themselves and, of course, to those that they lead. It is a concise book that is set up for positive action. Now, William is also an expert, of course, who speaks about leadership, organizational change, archaeology, and building great teams and leaders. As always, this episode is filled with insight and filled with gold. So make sure you grab your notepaper and stay tuned and get ready to take heaps of notes as we welcome William Attaway to the Today's Leader podcast.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome William Attaway. How are you, William?
I'm doing great, Coach Carl. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. Now, you're an author of a book, your second book, called The Catalytic Leadership. And as we've discovered, we're both members of the John Maxwell team. So we are going to have an amazing and a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's start off with, tell me the William Attaway story.
You know, I went to my first leadership conference when I was 15 years old, and I was hooked. I began to see and understand the power of leadership, for good or for bad, right? And from that point on, I have been a student of leadership now for over 3 decades. What I have been trying to do in recent years is take what has been invested in me through all of those opportunities to learn and share that and invest that in other people.
Yeah, excellent. So what was your initial foray? So so what got you into leadership and the development of initially yourself as a leader? What was there you've called your book Catalytic Leadership. Was there a catalyst there that said, hey, I've got to do something better here?
You know, it's one thing to study and read and learn about something. It's another thing to do it. And as I began in the business world, first to lead smaller teams and then to grow in that, I began to understand that there's a whole lot to learn there. And there are great leaders and there are bad leaders, and there's a whole lot in between. Yeah. And so as I began to practice and learn and grow, I realized that there's so much that I wanted to learn, and I felt like I didn't have an easy path to get there. The resources for leadership in the 80s were not they weren't everywhere, right, like they are today. And so I started to seek out ways and places and people that I could learn from. When I moved from the business world into the nonprofit environment as a local church pastor, I began to see that in the local church world, leadership development was something that sometimes we gave lip service to, but most of the time we just threw people in the deep end and expected them to sink or swim and learn how to lead. Yeah. And that is not a pathway to success.
Absolutely. It's interesting when we look at our own personal journey of leadership. I mean, just during my career, for example, I had 30 years in the retail space, and when I'd spent 15 years initially with Kmart over here in Australia, and then I joined a big box hardware retailer called Bunnings. And in those 15 years with Kmart, probably the last year was the only time that we had ever done any sort of leadership development. Yet I joined Bunnings, and Bunnings were fundamentally modelled on the Home Depot model, and all about empowering the team and the leadership in that sort of a way. And within probably the first 3 months, I'd done 2 leadership experiences, not just a workshop sitting in a class. These were leadership experiences. So I always fondly look back on those experiences because they taught me so much about myself. So when you were starting to develop yourself, what were some of those initial learnings that you had in respect of your own leadership?
I think one of the earliest ones I can remember was that initially I thought a leader looked the same, really no matter the context. And I began to learn and realize that that's not true, that leaders are going to look different in different contexts. There's principles that will stay the same, to be sure.
Yeah.
But really your own personal wiring and design, your skills, your talents, your passions, all of that plays into how you lead and should play into how you lead. You shouldn't try to be a carbon copy of somebody else or try to fit into a particular mold. You have to lead from who you are.
Excellent. Yeah. And just being an authentic leader, I can't be John Maxwell. I can't be William Attaway. I can only be Tony Coach Curl. And I'm going to have a laugh along the way as I do that. And
Absolutely.
And because we have to. I mean, one of the great things that we all learn from John is that he's got a great self-depreciating humor. And right. And I think we all have that because that's who we all, that's within our authentic self. So from that first leadership sort of foray for yourself, I would imagine that you would have developed then a plan for yourself, like a personal, whether we call it a personal growth plan or whether we call it a personal leadership plan. What did that initially look like, and how successful were you in putting it in place?
I wish I could say that early on that was some of the language that I used or even had in mind, but it wasn't. I really just wanted to learn as much as I could about as much as I could from as many people as I could who were further down the road than I was.
Yeah.
I firmly believe I'm not going to live long enough to make all the mistakes myself. I'd rather learn from people who have hit some of those and avoid those particular ditches if there's any way I can do that. So that really was the plan in the beginning, to just learn as much as I could from as many people as I could and try to benefit from what they had learned along their journey.
Yeah.
Over time, that changed, and I began to be much more intentional about that, about the what I was allowing into my world, right? The voices that I was allowing to speak directly into my life. Of course, that doesn't mean you stop listening to people you disagree with, because that's an important part of learning.
Yeah.
I think you have to learn to eat the fish and leave the bones. You have to learn and to engage with and interact with people from a wide variety of perspectives and disciplines. That's how we learn. That's how we grow best. So over time, my plan has become much more intentional, and that's what I coach leaders today in. How do you intentionally craft a development plan for your own growth? Because nobody else is going to do that for you. You have to choose to do that.
Yeah. And in many ways, that embracing of other ideas and other conversations, other perspectives, is the best way for us to make sure that we're getting the best outcome. I mean, who's to say that Absolutely. My thought process or your thought process is actually the best thought process? And maybe it's when we canvas and create that environment where people feel comfortable and safe to share their own experiences and opinions, that we actually work towards getting a better outcome, especially within that business world. And that's something that's really, really important for leaders to embrace. How do I do that? And not just end up surrounded by my own echo chamber. Because one of the challenges in the world today is that we're so busy shouting at each other that no one's actually listening to what's being said. So and true. regardless of what side of the divide that you're going to position yourself, even if indeed you do position yourself, to listen to people with an opposing view and truly listen, not just listen to shout them out or drown them out or cancel them out of conversation. I think that's really the only way that we can start to move forward. So now with a catalytic leader, talk me through the concept of the book.
So the book comes out of my work coaching leaders for the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
Over time, the conversations that I have helping leaders to intentionally grow, helping them to learn how to thrive in their context, several themes keep popping up, right? I keep coming across the same things. They look different, they smell different, they taste different, but it's the same threads that I find weaving through. And so what I decided to do was put into the book the 12 threads that I find running through so many of these conversations. What is it that makes a leader catalytic? And that word specifically comes out of my story because I initially went to university intending to study pharmacy, to become a chemist, right? And I got into inorganic and then organic chemistry and decided, this is not really what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. That's the point at which many wash out, and I was one of those. But in my brief studies in chemistry, I discovered the power of a catalyst. And that's something that you introduce that accelerates or incites significant change.
Yeah.
And I think about that in the context of leadership. And isn't that a great leader? One who it instigates or incites significant change in an organization to advance a mission, to see something happen. That's a catalytic leader. So what are the elements of that? Because I don't know a leader who doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to see change, doesn't want to see the ball move up the field. That's our job. But what are the elements of that? So that's where the book comes from. It's the 12 principles that I believe are ingredients in that particular recipe for catalytic leadership.
Excellent. So which I'm always reminded about a question that John Maxwell actually had once, and he was asked, what's the number one important thing that a leader should be doing? And he said, well, the number one most important thing is that there's no number one most important thing. Right. So I know that I'm asking a question about the 12 keys here, and I'm not quite sure how the answer is going to go. But out of those 12 keys, are there foundational keys that you need to have?
Yes, absolutely. The number one non-negotiable is actually what I put at the top. Number one, and that is the cultivation of a teachable spirit. It doesn't matter if you have all the rest of them if you don't have that one.
Yeah.
That is the key. Now, Jim Collins has written about this extensively in Built to Last and Good to Great, about the importance of humility in a level 5 leader. That's part of this. That's part of a teachable spirit. But how do you keep it? How do you cultivate a mindset where you are a continual learner, where you never cross that line of feeling like, I know it all, I got this, I don't have to learn any more about it. I've seen leaders who cross that line, and I don't think they meant to. And so for catalytic leaders, one of the things that I challenge when I coach leaders is, I want you to maintain this. I want you to keep it. And the only way you're going to do that is by being intentional about it.
Yeah. It's that growth mindset, that continuous learning principle is just something that leaders need to have. But it's sometimes easy to lose as well. I've seen a lot of leaders get demoralized or disenfranchised or feel that they're not being valued for what it is that they bring to the organization. So when you've got a leader that's like drifting and, it becomes pretty much a downward spiral when leaders start feeling like that. So whether it's a downward spiral that's going to force them to leave that organization or worse, stay in that organization. Right. What are some of the tips that you can provide to those leaders that have started to drift that downward spiral to what we might call mediocrity? What are some of the tips that you can share today that will help those leaders that may be feeling like that or have felt like that in the past?
That's such a great question. And I think so many leaders will wake up one day and find themselves in that drift. They didn't intend to get there, but they wake up and they've begun to accept that mediocrity. And they've begun to stop striving for excellence. In the context that I lead in, I say often, excellence honors God and inspires other people. Mediocrity does neither. Nobody is inspired by mediocrity.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid that? Like, what are some ways that we can do that? Well, one of those I've talked about, and that's the cultivation of a teachable spirit. The books we read, the voices that we listen to, whether it's on a podcast like yours, who interviews so many outstanding leaders, like what are we putting in? What are the inputs into our leadership life? That matters, and we have to be intentional about that. That's a very important part of avoiding the mediocrity drift. To stay challenged, to keep growing, to never settle for good enough and say, well, that's good enough for now. Good enough is never good enough for a leader.
Yeah, yeah. You talk a lot about, so if I'm for the general population, I'd imagine there's a concept of leadership that involves managing teams, managing people, and it's about that. It's about the team leadership. It's about the team management, so to speak. But what you've talked about so far has been largely about our own personal guidance, how we feel or our mindset towards being a leader.
Yes.
So in respect of that, how much in your mind of actual great leadership is about that personal wiring that we have? What does that look like? Or is someone whose whose sole focus is on serving others, and with your background, you've served others. So where's the balance there? I guess, William, is it personal wiring to become a leader, or is it that concept of servant leadership?
I think the answer is yes. It's impossible to give what you don't have. If you have an empty pitcher, how on earth are you ever going to fill anybody else's cup?
Yeah.
Right? You have to begin internally. You have to begin with yourself.
Yeah.
And this is why, there's a book that John Maxwell has written, Developing the Leader Within You. That's where you start, right? You have to begin there, because otherwise, if you try to lead beyond your own place of growth, then you're going to come across as disingenuous at best and hypocritical at worst. And that is not authentic leadership. And we know authenticity in our leadership matters to the people that we lead. We know that. It affects not only our effectiveness as a leader, but really the effectiveness of our organization toward the mission that we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, the leadership styles, I guess, or the leadership philosophies or archetypes is certainly changing, and I think what we've seen during COVID is that it's accelerated in many respects. So we've always had a belief that that genuine care, the curiosity, the compassion for our people has always been important for leaders, especially when you are inspired by, say, the John Maxwell values-based leadership programs that he walks through. But even more so today, and a lot of leaders, I guess, are struggling with that. They're struggling with the concept of being vulnerable with their people, for example, because their concept has always been, I need to appear bulletproof. I've got to have all the answers. I've got to be the leader that they want me to be. But that in itself creates a lot of problems, because people will always go to you with a problem instead of going to you in another environment, if you're another style of leader, with maybe a solution to the problem that they've just encountered, and they're just running it by you. So for leaders that are struggling out there, and let's face it, there's a number of them, how do they sort of, what's the stages that someone can help shift their mindset towards, I need to change, and I know, even though I might have had 30 years doing it this way, I know this is the only way, or one of the best ways forward?
I think growth always means change. And so if you're going to grow as a leader, that's going to require change every step of the way. There's never a point where you can settle into a rut, right, and say, I'm just going to stay here. I mean, I guess you can, but that's not growth. And I would argue that's not leadership. That's something else. So I think you have to recognize that growth means change. And you have to not be afraid of that. People are afraid of change. They fear change. They push back against change when it's not their idea. If it's their idea, they're all about it. But if it's not their idea, the only people who like change are a wet baby, right? So what are we going to do to help people not fear change? I think we see it as growth.
Yeah.
I think if we see change as an opportunity for growth, to get better, then I think if it changes the mindset, it changes the way we perceive it, changes our perspective, and I think that will help a leader begin to position themselves to take their next steps. It starts there. It starts in your mind. It starts with your perspective.
Yeah. I have full agreement there. I wrote a piece very early when I started doing leadership coaching, and I called it the 3 C's, and it's to me it's absolutely relevant for just about everyone out there. As human beings, we look for certainty. We want to have that certainty in our lives, and we want that, whether it's routine. We follow the same way to work, we drive the car the same, there's certainty that we're looking for. But certainty and having that certainty is then taking us to that concept of comfort. So we get comfortable with our certainty, and we know that the alarm's going to go off at 6 o'clock. We're going to get out of bed. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to have a shower. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be at work at 10:05. I'm going to have my morning tea. So we get into that habit. But then comfort will often lead to complacency, and we start to get a bit shoddy potentially. We start that concept of drifting that you talked about, and we start to drift through life as opposed to living life. And I then put in, so what stops that? Because we're in a bad place. And that's when I talk to people about, you will have a catalyst. There will be a catalyst that will come to us, which makes the 3 C's the 4 C's. And because there is going to be something that shakes us, whether it's that car accident on the way to work because we're in that mindless sort of a zone because we've done it so many millions of times before. So that's just my thoughts. How does that look within the catalytic leadership concept?
I think you're spot on. I think that drift toward complacency is exactly the mediocrity drift that I talk about. And it's so easy, and no one ever sets their GPS for that, right? You don't say,
absolutely.
That's where I want to end up. And yet, without intentional effort, intentional focus, it seems to be the default.
Yeah.
We get to choose. We get to choose where we're going to end up.
Yeah.
I love how Andy Stanley says this. He said, it is your direction, not your intention, that determines your destination.
Yeah.
Right? I'm setting my direction. I'm doing it intentionally, and I'm challenging leaders to intentionally set their own direction.
Yeah. Such a great way to put it. Andy Stanley's got a great way with words. So William, who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
Well, I'd be remiss not to include John Maxwell. I've been reading John's books for 15, 20 years now, and am consistently amazed and inspired by what he says and how he shares from his own life, his own journey, about how to get better at leadership. He's definitely going to be top of the list.
Yeah.
There's so many others over the years, and it's hard to just nail them down and say, it's just one or two. People like Patrick Lencioni, who has written so extensively on leadership and spoken about it, has influenced me tremendously. Jim Collins, Andy Stanley, all of these leaders are ones that I have had the benefit to learn from, who've invested in me. And now I think our responsibility, when we have been invested in, it's not just to hoard that. It's not just to hang on to it for ourselves. It's to share it for the benefit of other people around us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we move from that concept of developing the leader within us to developing the leader around us, which is once again just another great Maxwell book. So it's interesting. I and I've mentioned this on the podcast many times. My first John Maxwell book was a $2 copy in a clearance bin of Leadership Gold, and I've still got it today, and it's just well worn. But it really changed my perspective around leadership. That it could be fun because some of the titles in, that particular book are really quite genuinely funny. You don't send your eagles to duck school, for example, but it really changed my mind, my life in many ways, because all of a sudden I saw that there was potentially a better way to what I was doing as a leader. So. Now, William, we know that life is never this smooth sailing pathway to success. So talk me through firstly your relationship with failure.
Failure is something that you are going to encounter and you're going to experience. And early in my leadership journey, I was afraid of it just like everybody else, tried to avoid it at all costs. But something Maxwell said one time is that failure can either be your teacher or your undertaker. And I resolved when I heard that, I said, it's going to be my teacher.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn as much as I can. Now that involves that I'm going to reflect. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to evaluate, figure out what went right, what went wrong. How do I do it different next time? How do I make it better? All of that is part of the learning with failure. But failure can be a tremendous friend. When Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, right, was asked, you failed 10,000 times. How did that feel when you were trying to create a light bulb? His response was, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I successfully found 10,000 ways that didn't work. That's seeing failure as your teacher.
Yeah.
And so that's my perspective now on this side of my journey. And that's what I encourage in other leaders, to see it as part of the process.
Yeah.
You're never going to bat 1,000. You're not going to make the right decision every time.
Yeah.
Right? Learn from it. Don't let it sideline you. Don't end up in a ditch because you feel like one failure and you're out. No. Failure is part of the process of learning and growing and getting better.
Yeah. So with the shoe firmly on the other foot, tell me about your relationship with success. Now, this is the first time I've asked this question, so you're going to be the guinea pig on it. So how's your relationship with success?
I think you have to be very careful with success, just like with failure. The danger with success is different, because you can be tempted to read your own headlines and start to believe your own clippings, right? And start to think that you're better than you actually are. And that's where I think, again, a similar process of reflecting and evaluating and understanding that every success I have, every success you have, any leader has, is not ours alone, right? It's the success of the team. It's the success that we stand on the shoulders of others who went before us, who invested in us, who teach us. The minute we start to say, hey, I'm all that, I'm fantastic, look at me, we've missed it. We've missed it. That's a perspective that's going to end up in a ditch every time.
So out of everything that you've accomplished, William, what are you most proud of?
I've been married to my wife for 24 years. This December, it'll be 25 years. And we have 2 amazing daughters. And I think at the end of the day, one of the most important things for a leader to recognize is that, one day somebody else is going to sit in your chair at work. One day somebody else is going to do what you do. But the people who are closest to you, they matter. They matter. And about 3 years ago, we had an experience with my older daughter walking through a very unexpected diagnosis of a brain tumor and a very rare form of pediatric cancer.
Yeah.
And she's doing great. And we're so grateful for that. But what a reminder that was for me of what truly matters. One day somebody else will do what I do, but no one else can be the husband to my wife and the father to my girls. And so for me, that's going to be really near the top. If I'm a success, that's where it starts.
Yeah, powerful message. Just powerful. And so your daughter's doing well now?
She is. She's doing great. She's almost 3 years now past her initial diagnosis and all the treatment, the surgery, and the radiation. She's doing great. It has not regrown, and we're just so incredibly grateful to God for that.
Excellent. That's great news to hear. So, William, what's the vision for you moving forward?
My vision is to help as many leaders as I can to intentionally grow, to get better as leaders, because I believe when a leader gets better, everybody in the organization feels that. Everybody benefits. Everybody is going to experience the benefit because of that. To impact a leader is to impact an organization, a company, a church, a mission. And that's what I want to do. I want to help leaders get better. And you don't get better accidentally.
Yeah.
You get better intentionally.
Yeah.
And so that's why, as a leadership coach, what I get to do is I get to come alongside leaders, help them see things they might not see, help them ask questions of themselves they might not have ever asked, and help them grow and help them develop a plan that they will then use for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So one of the key messages there that you're sending is don't leave your growth to chance. Take control of it and really really champion your own personal growth. And I think that that's a great message. So William, how can people connect with you?
If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a free copy of the book. You can get a physical copy if you're in the continental U.S. We'll have a way for you to get a digital copy if you're outside the continental U.S. But my goal is to get this book into as many hands of as many leaders as I can. I want them to see and benefit from the investment in my life that has been made by so many leaders so that they can begin the process of developing that intentional plan for themselves. So I would love to offer that to all of your podcast listeners to get that, catalyticleadershipbook.com.
Excellent. No worries. I will make sure that that is in the show notes, William. So, William, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your investment in today's leaders.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this.
And now, it's time for Tony's 2 cents.
Now, during our interview, William spoke of the teachable spirit. It's one of the key principles outlined in his Catalytic Leadership book. And this is something that we should all be intentional about working on. Many people I know who work as coaches will often tell me about people talk about their clients in terms of being coachable. And by being coachable, it's not just about taking something on and doing it. It's about being curious around their own performance, and curious around their own behaviors, their traits, and their endeavors, and seek their own answers and utilize the coaching relationship as part of that. That's what I would talk about if I was talking through what a coachable spirit is. Someone who's curious, someone who really wants to engage their highest potential and take insights along the journey and make them their own. They build growth in themselves, and that helps deliver the intentional leadership that William speaks to. Being intentional in your own growth is so important. And if you're waiting for others to fill that cup of personal growth, it's likely you're going to be waiting a long, long time. It's your growth. Don't leave it to chance. Realize the importance of it for yourself and get going. Let's make it happen. As always, thanks to William for investing in today's leaders, and of course his links are in the show notes. If you're looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com.au. We really are driving a leadership revolution to build tomorrow's best leaders today. Today's Leader is a collective, the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Mastermind. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional, and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call right from the homepage at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget, wherever you are standing stronger, braver, and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. Don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.